You're listening to In Sickness, a podcast about caregiving with Allison Breininger and Justin Bima. Good morning, Allison.
Good morning, Justin. How are you?
I'm doing well this morning. I'm very excited. Today's a big day. For those of you who are looking at the title of this episode, this is our 100th episode.
Dun, 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 dun.
Which is, it's just wild for me to think about. We've been doing this for over 4 years now.
Yeah.
Getting close to 5.
Right. Yeah.
I think, maybe. But yeah, it's just a great moment to, and we'll talk more about, reflecting back on these years, but just to kind of like pause and be like, wow, like,
yeah,
this has been a really great thing. I've
Yeah.
really enjoyed doing this.
Yes.
And I'm just really happy that this is part of my life and what I get to do.
Same, friend. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I cannot even, like, it blows my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, both of us, we have such sometimes intense lives off and on. Right. And so even to like look back and be like, wow, those are the same people from 4 years ago that are here now, and all the things that we have lived through together in our personal lives, in the bigger world. Our first communication about this was in January 2020 before all the things.
Right.
And so we've been through it together, and I'm just so glad that we've been, like that happens a lot with friendships, but we have sort of almost like a documentation of it. And that is really a very cool.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. So let's get into that. Let's talk about like, how did this all begin? Because sometimes people are like, wait a minute, you're in Minnesota and he's in Washington. Like, how did this happen? So do you have a memory of like, how did we first find each other? Do you remember?
I do. I first came across you. It was an article, I think the caregiving space, maybe?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think it was maybe from a newsletter or something, or maybe I was looking on their website, because it was a period in my life where I was just, I don't know, I guess drowning while caregiving and trying to find resources, trying to find like voices that somehow echoed what I was feeling, and like from my age group, and caring for a spouse, and this is really hard without the but kind of sentiment. And there was an article you'd written that I read, and it was about, what was it about? It was about, you had gone to a work meeting, and Sean was home with Maya.
Oh, yeah.
And something like, he had an emergency while he was there, and you were like, I wasn't there. And it was this whole thing. And it was very much mirrored. I mean, not to the extreme example of that, but like this feeling I had where I was going into work every day and Sarah was at home. Yeah. And that sense of like, well, what if something happens while I'm at home?
Right.
And it just really resonated with me, and your voice and all of that. And so from there, I probably made it to your website, read a lot more because you had a lot of more writing there. And then started following you on Instagram. And that's how I came into your orbit.
Yeah. And then you must have like DM'd me at some point or something. Yeah,
I think because you had like, would have posts and like, tell me about, what do you think about this? Or like responses. And I think I just started kind of responding to more of those, and we kind of got to know each other through that. And kind of.
The rest is history.
Sort of, yeah.
Well, because the funny thing is, so it's amazing. You were able to find the text.
Yeah.
The text from between the two of us that launched this. And so obviously at some point, and again, my brain, too much has happened to me. So my memories are fuzzy. Yeah. But so at some point we jumped the shark from Instagram to texting. Yeah. Because that you know what I mean? We became like texting friends, like an actual world. So you found that. Do you have that pulled up?
I do.
About that interaction?
I do. This is actually still from Instagram.
It was Instagram. Okay.
Yeah. And so basically I was like, hey, I have an idea for a caregiving podcast. Like, it's something that I'm like thinking about. And you responded with a bunch of the, I don't know, like the wide-eyed, like
kind of big eyes, big eye emojis.
And your first thing was, can I be a guest?
Oh, right. That's
And
so
so,
nice.
which
Yes.
was, but then like what my idea was and kind of how I responded is like, well, I'm thinking of, I didn't, I thought I had this idea and
Yeah.
I've been listening to podcasts for like since like way, way back. They first started happening.
Before they were cool.
Way before they were cool. I mean, they were cool, but,
Right.
and like a lot of the ones that I was drawn to the most or were favorite ones is where there was like 2, maybe 3 people consistently there talking and having like that rapport.
Yeah.
And, maybe there's a topic that they're kind of talking around. Maybe sometimes it's just, telling stories or chatting, but like that dynamic. And so I wanted like that dynamic. So I was like, actually, you were like, going to be a guest. And I was like, well, I'm thinking of 2 co-hosts rather than a host and a guest. And I was like, are you interested in co-hosting a 6-episode run? No pressure. And
I remember that moment. I remember I was like, I was cooking.
Okay.
And I remember just like sort of checking message, in between, sauteing things or whatever. And I remember seeing that and thinking like, and I do remember thinking like, it feels like a lot, like a big undertaking, like not 6, but just like a podcast.
Right.
Like, how do you even do that? And what is that? But because you said 6, I was like, I mean, I could do anything 6 times, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was my response?
Yes, duh, of course. A lot of caps there. A lot of caps.
Yes, duh, of course. That's very, can't you tell I'm a wordsmith? Yeah. But I do remember, I mean, I think that it's funny that was my written response because I remember having a moment of like, I don't know.
Oh.
But thinking like, just because I remember thinking like, that feels like a lot.
Right.
Like complicated, you know? But I think something that has worked out so beautifully with us is like the mixture of our gifts.
Right.
So, I often do sort of the writing, planning beforehand. You are all the tech stuff. So I didn't have to worry about any of that. Like that was the part that felt intimidating to me. And you found like, here's the platform we're going to use. And you sent me a microphone and you know what I mean? And you do the editing and then I do the social media and the marketing. And it just feels like our 2 sets of skills have come together so beautifully that we've been able to just like take on all the pieces. And so it hasn't felt overwhelming.
Yeah.
But so when you said that 6, did you really mean 6? Because I feel like since then you have admitted something about that.
Well, I kind of thought that we would build, I was hoping we would build momentum from 6 and be like, let's keep going.
Right.
But at the same time, so I really wanted you as the co-host. Like before I mentioned this, like that was the idea. Like you would be the co-host. Yeah. And I was like, how do I bring this up kind of thing? And part of that was you talked about how like me handling like the technical side of things. Like I wanted it to be very much, you can show up talking to the mic and that's what you need to do. And so handling the stuff in the background. And also one of the reasons that I wanted to do this and one of the reasons I wanted to co-host it with you is, as I said, like your voice in your writing really resonated with me. And I was at a point in my caregiving where I was trying to like still trying to process, what I'd been through. I think Sarah was improving some from her years where she was just totally in bed. I think we were on the ending of that phase, I think. And I was like, I kind of want to just talk about caregiving with you. Yeah. And have these conversations and sort of like just be able to like talk shop with someone who really gets it and has been through it. Yeah. And I was like, this is a way to facilitate that. So it was as much for my benefit as anybody else. But I was like, and these will be good conversations, I think, for people to listen and also enjoy. So that's kind of a little bit.
That's so cool. I've never heard that. Yeah. Right. Well, and the funny thing for me is, I will say for me, it was in some ways the opposite. Okay. Not that I didn't want to have these conversations with you, right? But that when I think of podcasts, I think about the audience. And so I think for me, I was thinking, okay, we're going to put this thing into the world. And for me, the realization or the thing that has happened over these 100 episodes is that I sometimes forget that anyone else even listens. Oh, yeah. It's just these really powerful conversations between the 2 of us that feel for me so clarifying. Oh, yeah. And then I come into them and I'm able to process like what has happened in the last 2 weeks or what is swirling. You'll hear in a little bit listeners from somebody on the hotline who said that like the podcast has been able to like take the swirling in his brain and clarify. And that's what I feel like happens when you and I talk. And so for me, it did the opposite effect of like, I pictured it as like, we're going to put something in the world because people need it.
Right.
And instead it's turned into this beautiful thing for me that other people just like happen to listen to. And then it's like, oh yeah, you guys are actually enjoying this too. And it's helpful to you. That's so great.
Yeah.
That's like a bonus, but it feels like the bonus part. You know what I mean? That I did not expect going into it.
Right. And we had never actually like spoken.
Right.
When I suggested this.
It was only through chatting. Like
it.
Online. Yeah.
So it was kind of a risk that, because, not,
right.
I didn't know conversationally how things would flow.
Sure.
And it turns out that it's great.
That's great.
But yeah, it took a shot in the dark, and look where we're at now. Yeah.
Well, and I think, avid listeners will know this, but it took 3 years before we met in person.
Right. Yeah.
So a couple summers ago, my family came out to see you, and then this fall you came out here to see us. And so, I mean, that still is wild that like we've only like met in person twice, but yet, every other Sunday morning here we sit. And so, wow. Oh, so that was January. That text you showed me was January 2020.
Yep.
When was the first episode? Do you remember?
Oh, that's a great question that I should have been prepared for, but I can find that.
Because I think, COVID was a big part of our early episodes. And I still chuckle that we have an episode called something like, As We Emerge from the Pandemic. That was like really early on.
I think it was like May 2020. It was like after the big vaccination push.
Yeah. And we were like, ta-da! Oh, silly us.
April 27, 2020.
Okay.
So we were... Yeah, that's certainly in it. That's like a month and a half in.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, from that January conversation of like, hey, you want to do this? That's actually pretty fast for us to like start it, make it happen. Yeah. Amazing. What have been, and now that we're at 100, right?
Yeah.
What have been some of your favorite episodes or moments over all these episodes?
So I went back and I kind of looked through all the episodes we'd recorded, and it was like, wow, we did talk about that. And some of them like, wow, that we talked about that a long time ago.
Yeah.
Like one of the episodes I remember that was, I think, good for me. And I think that, I felt like was a really good episode that we put out, was well responded to, was we did an episode on caregiver burnout. And I remember like, the graphic you put together for it on Instagram was like a plug-in, like a cord that was like frayed,
frazzled. Yeah.
And I just kind of like remember that. But that was episode 31.
Oh my God.
That was a long time ago.
A long time ago. Yeah.
That, and even one prior to that, episode 24, that I remember just also being a really good conversation, was Must We Find Meaning?
I loved that one.
And like, there's these voices that are saying, this is such a meaningful experience, and like you find purpose in caregiving. And it's like, well, okay, maybe, but that's not what it doesn't have to be. That doesn't have to be the end. It can just be this difficult thing that you're going through, kind of.
Yeah.
And I just remember that being a really good conversation. And I was surprised at how early on that episode actually was. One of the first 6 that I remember, I think this was my idea. But it was on appointment days. I'm never just the spouse.
Yeah.
Which was something that I had like really felt so strongly all these years.
Yeah.
And to be able to kind of talk through that with someone else who also could relate to that was really helpful for me.
Yeah.
I remember.
Yeah. I think like I went through all the episodes too. And some of them I was like, oh yeah, we did talk about that. Oh yeah, we did talk about that. And I feel like especially the ones that were just the two of us, I feel like those just, in a way, those didn't stick out as much because it was just sort of like the conversation just wove into my being. Like they were just really powerful. Like I came out with new understandings and whatever.
Yeah.
And so it's some of the guest ones that really stuck out to me. So like we had Death Doula Jane.
That was also, one of my favorite episodes.
And I quote that all the time. I mean, I think about like that she talked about the docks and the different boats going by. And I'm like, ooh. Yeah. And I think a lot about the palliative episode in the moment when he said that basically palliative providers just go for an extra year to learn how to be nice. I'm like, oh my God. What? And then there was the one with Dr. Vida of Yes, and about the whole family. And I remember having lots of aha moments in that about our daughter and about like, oh, did we this really? Oh man, she was in it too. And have I been enough of, have I acknowledged that enough?
Yeah.
So those are some that just like, like come to mind and then I quote. And I also feel like it's often the most recent ones, right? So like I feel like I've been quoting the what about when the people closest to us don't show up?
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
Lately. Because I think that's a really powerful one as well. So, so I mean, a cool thing that we did was we put out this hotline.
Yeah.
And we asked people to respond, and you all did, and we love it. So should we hear from some of our listeners about what some of their favorite episodes and moments were?
Yeah, let's do that.
Hi, my name is Anna, and it is impossible to pick a favorite episode, but on your most recent episode 98 maybe, I think it was Allison used the term ring 72. It was a bit hyperbolic, but I loved it because y'all were talking about the people who come through for you, who show up for you, the ones you thought would show up and the ones who actually show up, and the unpredictable nature of how it takes a village, and a village does show up. And sometimes a village doesn't show up. But anyway, I just really loved that thought of ring 72.
My favorite episodes were the toxic positivity one and the one about how self-care isn't what we should be telling caregivers, but instead focus on community care.
Podcast number 46 with Dr. Megan Voss is one that really resonated with me. Megan deals with the effect trauma has on our physical and mental health, the mind-body connection.
Every episode that you drop brings a moment of comfort and connection I never realized that I needed so deeply. Each time I listen to a new episode, it becomes a highlight of my month. Knowing that I have these moments of understanding from you both gives me a source of comfort and joy that I can't quite put into words.
Wow.
Whew. It's humbling.
It is. Listening to these voicemails was very much that. Yeah.
And just wild. And some of these folks we have gotten to know through support groups and whatnot. Some of them are brand new voices to us. And so it's just always strikes me when we hear from people that we don't even know. We put this into the world and off it goes. And we don't know unless we get a random email or a message. I can't remember if I shared this, but last summer we were at a graduation party.
Okay.
And someone sort of sidled up and was like, I listened to your podcast. And I was like, what? And so she was obviously a friend of this mutual friend who's having the party.
Yeah.
And she said she's a runner and she listens while she runs.
Okay.
And that she often has to like pull off to the side and just almost like double over and just like can't even, because she's like, I've never heard people say the things out loud that I am thinking. And it makes me just have to stop everything I'm doing. And so it has been just like such a gift and I don't even know. It just is wild. I know we keep using that word.
Yeah.
To just hear from people the impact that this thing that you and I are doing is having on them.
Right. Because it feels like we're just in this. I mean, we're not even in a room talking, but we're just talking. Right.
I know.
And it's hearing people talk about how like we've given them words that they didn't know they like needed to hear, or hearing things in a new way, or like you said, having to stop and like, wow, like I've never heard someone say that before. And I hear that and it's like, there's a moment of like, are you listening to the same podcast? Because it feels like just this conversation between friends.
Sure.
And I think for myself, like you are in the business of caregiving and advocating and supporting, and like that's your life.
Yep.
And for me, this is just a thing I do on the side.
Yeah.
And life is such that day to day, not really doing any caregiving these days, which is great.
Yeah.
That's one thing, thinking back to where things were at with the first episode with Sarah and where things are at now. Like I would have never imagined then where things would be now.
Right. Amazing.
But just to hear how our words, like my words, have impacted people is, as you said earlier, like it is deeply humbling.
Yeah.
And it has really, I don't know, it's just been a powerful thing to think about how I have been able to take this experience that I have, and just by talking about this thing that is caregiving with you, that it has touched so many people.
Yeah.
And it's just, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think from so many people say that it's like the stuff, kind of like what you said the first time you read my writing, is like things that you were thinking and feeling, but nobody else was talking about. And so suddenly people log in or tune into this podcast and they hear us saying things that have only been in their head.
Right.
And then they're like, what?
Yeah.
And like you said, I get to, I'm hanging out with caregivers all the time.
Right.
And so then I get to report back to you, because sometimes at things like support groups or things, people are quoting you. They're quoted. Like at the conference the other day at CaregiverCon, somebody raised their hand and said, like Allison said on the Insignis podcast, when blah, blah, blah. And I was like, what is happening?
Yeah.
What is happening?
So,
yeah, I mean, I think it continues to be a beautiful, humbling thing. And I know that we are only hearing like a sliver of the impact that it's actually had, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's hear some of the messages about what this podcast has meant to people.
Yeah, for sure.
And I wanted to say that this podcast has meant literally everything to me while I'm going through my caregiving journey. Your ability to put into words the things that are just kind of flying around in my brain as fragmented thoughts is extraordinary. I always find myself pausing it and just saying out loud, yes, that's exactly what it feels like, or that's exactly what it means. And it also means a great deal to me that two people whom I've never met in person and I hope to meet someday are two people that I could reach out to no matter how dark or how low I'm feeling. And that is not only welcomed, but actively encouraged. Helps me get through my week. What you do for me and for everyone else in this caregiving role is absolutely, I don't really have a word for it. I will say amazing, even though that it seems completely inadequate to what I feel.
But I just feel less alone in the caregiving journey whenever one of your podcast episodes drops. And I just love learning from you all. So thank you so much for doing what you do. And I'm not alone. And listening to your podcast reminds me of that I'm not alone in my caregiving journey. So thank you.
I felt like I had discovered something that was telling the story of what I had been experiencing up until that point for 7 months. And then as I've listened in the months and over a year that have followed, I have found so many ways in which I could relate to what was being discussed.
Personally, I have found value both as a caregiver and as I navigate grief after the passing of my lovely wife.
I would feel such validation about my feelings and was learning so many new coping skills that I wanted to share all I learned with fellow caregiving friends. We would meet when time allowed, or for those who lived a distance by phone. We would listen to a podcast, then use it as the agenda for our conversation. We would share our personal experience with each topic, discuss our frustrations, fears, and possible ways to cope so that we and the person we were caring for had a chance to live the best day-to-day life as possible under such stressful situations. This experience gave us a sense of community, a chance for self-growth, as well as a temporary release of our grief.
When I discovered your podcast was all the way back, I think you had one episode out. And when I finally found that podcast, it was like finding a breath of air for somebody who felt like they were drowning.
Sadly, I'm no longer a caregiver, but I still listen to every podcast. The skills I have learned and continue to learn have provided me with a strong personal foundation for every aspect of my life.
Wow.
Whew. It's kind of like being at like an awards. Like, it's like, I don't even know, just like sitting and listening to all this is like, I wanted to note that one of the listeners said that, you know, she and her friends created almost like a book club around this.
Right.
And that was actually the idea, because she had told me that was the idea that sort of sparked our support groups.
Right.
Being tied to the podcast episodes. Also at CaregiverCon recently, this van of ladies showed up.
Yeah.
And they were just like, it's you. You're the one from the podcast. And they too, they live 2 hours from the Twin Cities. They also have created a group where they listen to the podcast and then they get together and then they talk about it. And so they had rented a van and listened to the most recent episode in the van on the way to the conference and then discussed it together. And so I love that too, that it has made people feel less alone just listening to us, right?
Yeah.
And knowing but that also it's given them a platform and a like an agenda, she said, to share with other people.
Yeah.
And to have a conversation with other people. And that's such a cool thing at the support groups too, is that people are like, oh, in that one part. And then people are like, yeah, you know, that they can come together around it too, in community. So, yeah.
Yeah. That's something I never imagined, thought of, considered when we started this, that people would find community, listeners would find community with other listeners.
Yeah.
In a way that, like, at least, you know, you have the support group now, which is an avenue for that. But like, we didn't have any means for listeners to interact, or like, that was nothing that we facilitated at all. That just is this thing that like organically happened.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of the things when we get messages from people, which is again, one of my favorite things is when someone reaches out and is like, you know, here's kind of my story, here's kind of, you know, thank you for doing the podcast, whatever it is. But I love to ask, you know, how you found it.
Yeah.
And the number of, there's, you know, people just like, whether they happen to find it searching for a podcast on caregiving.
Yeah.
Or like word of mouth, whether from a friend or like an online forum or something. And it's amazing the way that our listeners just can't not talk about the podcast with the people in their lives to some extent.
Right.
Again, deeply humbling.
Yes.
Yeah.
When you think about, you know, on episode, what was it, 99, when Ella was on?
Yeah.
And she talked, you know, she's in Australia.
Right.
And she talked about the friends that she has made across the world through the podcast and the support groups that she talks to all the time. And just the fact that we have played a part in facilitating that is
it's amazing.
So we just got to hear, you know, the impact this has had on people. What do you feel like, what impact has doing this podcast had on you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I look at this body of work that we've put together. And it's something that I can look back on and I feel I'm very proud of what we've done.
Yeah.
It's something, you know, I am not a natural public speaker.
Okay.
And this, I think because it's a recorded thing where it's just me and you talking, like it felt okay. But it also, at the beginning, it was very vulnerable to like, let's have a conversation. I'm going to talk and we'll put it out there. And I don't know what the response is going to be. I don't know if anybody's going to listen.
Right.
Like it felt exposed to some extent.
Sure.
You know, because again, I'm not, as part of my day-to-day life, that's not something I'm doing really.
Right.
You know, at work, I interact with the same people on a regular basis. I'm not talking in front of, you know, 50 to 100 people for stuff.
Right.
And so so it's been humbling in that regard, but also it's, I think, given me some confidence in being able to share from my experience. And like, I think that now, if I were to have an opportunity to speak to people about this in a in-person situation, I'm not saying that I would have no anxiety,
right,
and be like, oh, this is a cakewalk, but I would approach it with a much more stronger footing than I did at the start of this.
Sure.
I also think that, I don't know, I think I've learned to, not be a better conversationalist, but like how to do the medium better.
Yeah. Yeah.
In a way, like I thought about going back and listening to our first episode.
I know. I don't think I could.
And mainly because I wanted to know what was true, like where Sarah was at that point.
Right.
But I don't know how it would feel to listen to what we sounded like initially. And I didn't want to roll that stone over. But yeah, I feel like it's an area where I've been able to grow. It's an area where I've been able to, like you said earlier, like you handle a lot of the planning and the mapping out and like contacting guests and like that side of things. And I've been able to like get, much better at editing this thing.
Yeah.
And, have a technical side of things that I've been able to like, I was able to like learning how to do all of that and like figuring out software and like that scratched an itch of like, researching and all of that, which was fun at the beginning. And yeah, it's just, it's meant all of these things there. And it's also just meant a great deal that out of this thing, I have this amazing friend. And because we were friends at the beginning, but like we weren't
like
friends.
Internet friends.
Yeah. And it has, our friendship has been immensely helpful for me in my life.
Yeah.
In all of the things that have gone on in these last years. And I'm very appreciative for that. And I know we say that we would still do this if it was just the two of us talking.
Yeah.
And in a lot of, I think there's some truth to that.
Yeah.
If we would just have having regular scheduled time.
Yeah.
To talk is it's been great.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I love that, we have talked about that, like at times that when we, when there's a stretch between episodes or whatever, that we're like, well, you still want to hang out.
Right. Yeah.
Right. But I love just like, life goes that this has sort of, I don't want to say forced, but like we both have wild lives. And so with other friends, like, I feel like I'm canceling all the time. But this is like given us a chance, like if we're like a really great check-in every other week. And I feel like for me, this whole thing has been, it's like therapy. I I still have the official therapist, but like,
I'm not qualified.
Right. But I think for me to come to sit down here every other Sunday and to say like, what has the last 2 weeks been like for me? And then a place to like untangle the swirling of whatever the last 2 weeks have been, or just whatever's going on, and because I'm with caregivers all the time, I sometimes am sensing themes, right? You know what I mean? I'm like, everybody seems to be feeling this. They're talking about this. And so it sort of gives me this place to like untangle it all and process it all and talk about it and just like move, like put it down. You know what I mean? But I just think I've come to so many insights because of these conversations.
Right.
Whereas otherwise it would have just continued being those swirling things. Like I'm sure you've seen, and maybe you've even mentioned it here before, but those like comics of like a therapist and a person, and the therapist or the person's holding like a gnarly ball of yarn. Yeah. And the therapist is slowly pulling the string and then like untangling it. And I feel like that's what these episodes are for me, is like I walk in like all the things that, and then even if, we walk in, we're like, well, today let's talk about, I don't know, loneliness. And we have some ideas, but it always ends up like I end up with aha moments and like clarity that I leave the episode with that I didn't walk in with. Yeah. And so I feel like it's just been so good for me to have this place. And I think something I love is that like the other day when I did a workshop on anticipatory grief, that I was able to say at the end, if you'd like to learn more about this, there's an episode. And so to have this, that I meet with people, and then someone says, oh, my sister was a caregiver for her husband and he just passed away. And I'm like, we have one on grief and how it's different for caregivers. And so I love that we have built this library too, that we can refer back to, and then we can sort of give to people at different times, instead of being like, oh, I was just talking to my friend, like it's like I was, and it's recorded so you can all listen and learn. Yeah. But yeah, there are not adequate words to just sort of describe like this friendship, and I think you are like the most model of all friends of all time, and are so good at like remembering dates and remembering things that are going on, and just texting and like thinking of you today and all of these things. And so And just the fact that our families are all now friends and we all,
right.
you know what I mean, have all spent time together. That was not something that was not on my bingo card. Like I didn't,
Right.
I mean, I thought, oh, this would be fine, but I didn't think like I'd get like this amazing lifelong friend out of this situation. So, so thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. You know, we always also talk about supporters.
We do.
And it's been cool I'm so glad. I don't know how that started, but I'm so glad that that's part of this and that people have come to recognize that. And I have had people who say, one of the people we'll hear from in a minute doesn't have personal caregiving things, but has listened to every single episode as a supporter because he just really wants to learn how he can show up for the people in his lives. And so I think I love that that's an aspect of this.
Yep.
And I hear people say that, like, there's a friend of mine who works at a church and there was a family who had an emergency. And she was like, I knew exactly how to show up for them. I knew what to do. I knew what steps to take. I didn't feel overwhelmed because I was like, ooh, like I've been training for this moment, because of this. And so I love that that's a piece of it as well. And I think that even sometimes it's been good for me in those moments to have to answer the question, like, what do I wish for?
Right. Yeah.
And how often it's like the same thing, regardless of the topic. But I think it's a good thing for me to stop and pause and say, like, what would this look like if it was being done really well?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's been interesting. Like I had an experience, I don't know, this was maybe a year or more ago. I was selling some stuff on Craigslist and to a fellow home brewer. I used to do brew beer at home a lot, and I've gotten out of that, and I was selling off a lot of my equipment. And they came to my work so I could, give them something. And he just mentioned that, I've been listening to your podcast. It's really good. It's just been really insightful. Again, not someone who has a caregiving type role, but someone who is just interested in, from a learning how to relate to other people sense, I think.
Yes.
So that was, amazing. I have a coworker who, I don't know if he still does, but he listened and he would periodically just be like, hey, the podcast you're doing great and stuff like that. And, I feel like there are people in my life who I know have listened, and it feels like maybe they have been more intentional in their support as a result.
Yeah.
And to know that is happening beyond, with other people who are just supporters listening that are impacting and knowing how to better support other people.
Right. But it's benefiting you mean?
Yeah. It has benefited me, but then also to think about, well, it's doing that for other people too.
Yeah. Right.
Is meaningful. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right. No, I'm so glad that that's a component that has been part of this. Because also I think it's, like you said, you are getting a benefit even from people in your life. And I know that I have as well, of people who listen, but it's a way that we can do it without having the direct conversation. Right.
Yeah.
And I hope that others use it in that way as well. So instead of having to okay, Uncle Joe, I'm going to sit down and tell you about what it's like to be grieving at the holidays. Maybe you can send the podcast episode to people and be like, hey, here's some people. And then, and so essentially we're doing the hard work so that, that listeners don't have to.
Yes.
And so that's use us as blame it on us, we'll take it. So I think that that's a powerful use of it as well, is that we can be kind of the voice for folks who are tired and don't always have the voice and don't have the platform. And so if we can be out here saying it, great. Yeah. We're happy to do that. Yeah.
For sure.
Well, should we hear from some people about supporters? Yeah.
From some supporters.
And have shared so many episodes with friends and family members to help show them ways that they can better support me and other caregivers in their lives. So it has just been such a blessing, and I'm so thankful to you both for putting this together and for speaking out about all the different complexities that come along with the caregiving experience.
So I just am thankful for the words that the podcast provides to people, especially supporters who have caregivers in their lives and want to be able to feel like they can approach them, and instead of being afraid of offending them, saying the wrong thing or saying nothing instead of saying something. That I just love the fact that you two are so wonderful about giving us words and language to help us in whatever situation we might encounter.
I'm a licensed mental health professional, and I'm calling to say thank you for all of the hard work you've done on the In Sickness podcast. Many of my patients have a cancer diagnosis, and they come to me for their own mental health, but are very worried about the well-being of their family caregivers. I'm able to recommend this podcast to those patients as something they can share with their family caregiver. It helps them to feel empowered, and it helps improve the well-being of their caregivers. And for that, I am so grateful. Thank you for all the hard work you do and for providing this wonderful resource to the many who need it.
That's also something that's very humbling, that someone in a professional setting uses this podcast as a resource.
Yes.
We're doing something good. We're putting something good out there.
We really are.
I know that you've mentioned that I think there was someone using our podcast episodes in like a syllabus for a college class.
I think it was a social work class. And I think other people in the medical settings have as well, like given this as homework.
That's something
to listen to it. Yeah. Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's a thing, friend. We've created a thing.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about, it's 100 in, what next?
Well, I mean, we keep going.
We keep going.
It's interesting that from time to time, I go through this period of like, what are we going to talk about? Like we've covered so much ground, and I was looking through all of these episodes we've done, and we've covered so much.
Right.
But there's still so much to talk about.
I know.
And we never
scratched the surface.
We never seem to run out. We always can come up with something to talk about, whether it's something inspired by an event in our own lives, whether it's like you said, you've been kind of like your finger on the pulse of what people are talking about, and like everybody seems to be asking about this. Well, let's talk about that, or whatever it is. I don't doubt that we're going to be able to keep chatting as friends and talking about caregiving, and hopefully continue to help people, hopefully continue to help build community amongst caregivers, to help them feel less alone, and to help them be better supported in their lives as caregivers.
Absolutely. We already have a long list for 2025 of guests that have agreed that we just need to schedule. And so I feel like early on we were like, is there anything else? Like, I think that was part of the 6 episodes is like, I mean, we can probably come up with 6 topics.
Right. Yeah.
And now we're 100 in and have a long list. And so I think that just says that, this is such a huge, multifaceted experience, and that we could talk about forever.
Yeah.
And even I think sometimes we look back and we're like, oh, we talked about loneliness, but now we're different people than we were 3 years ago when we talked about that. And so some of these things we might come back to because we have new insights and experiences and research and all of that. And so, I don't worry that we're going to run out of things to talk about. Yeah.
Good.
What a gift it would be if we did, you know what I mean? In a way, like we fixed this thing, but I don't think that's going to happen. I am so excited about just continuing on. And this has just been such a beautiful part of my life. And such an unexpected, like this was not on the vision board.
Yeah.
And yet it has become such an integral part of my like personal and professional life. And so just so grateful and excited to keep on going. So
it's been a great journey, and
it has.
Look forward to continuing that together.
Here's to the next 100.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Let's hear let's have our friends send us off.
Okay.
Congratulations. Thank you. And keep up the outstanding work.
Cheers to Allison and Justin for a job that continues to be well done. Thank you so much for caring.
I wish you all the best of luck as this continues. May you have another 100 episodes.
You've been listening to In Sickness. Find us online at insickness.care or on Instagram at insicknesspodcast. You can send your questions and comments to insicknesspodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or fellow caregiver, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening, and take care.